The Marines who waited on the beach at Guadalcanal in August 1942 thought they would fight an enemy they could clearly see. But instead, they spent 3 long and scary months being killed by ghosts because Japanese snipers turned the thick jungle trees into a tall killing place where death came without warning, often without sound, and always from a spot no one could point to. By the time the island was finally taken in February 1943, the Marine reports showed something that scared the Pacific commanders for the next 2 years, because one well-placed sniper could cause more dead Marines than a whole enemy rifle group. The numbers told a dark story. On Bougainville in November 1943, the 3rd Marine Division counted an average of 15 men killed every day from sniper fire. And that means 15 killed, not just hurt, because Japanese snipers using the Type 97 rifle with its 6.5mm round were trained to aim for the head and upper chest. The wounds looked so similar that Marine doctors could tell a sniper hit before even checking the body. One shot, one kill was not just a saying. It was a clear and harsh truth that turned every step through the jungle into a deadly lottery. The Japanese had perfected something the Marines never practiced in training, because their snipers did not hide behind rocks or in holes where machine guns could scare them. They were 30, 40, even 60 feet high in coconut trees, tied to the trunks with rope and covered with leaves that made them invisible, even when someone stared right at them. Some snipers stayed in place for days before the Marines arrived, with water and rice balls, and they used bags for waste, so no smell or sound would reveal their place. They could shoot trails, water spots, and command areas. And they had patience that felt almost supernatural. At Cape Gloucester in December 1943, one sniper held down a whole rifle group of 43 men for 7 long hours. Every time a man moved around cracked past his head or slammed into the log he hid behind. The Marines fired thousands of rounds into the trees, called for mortar fire, and even tried using a tank to blast the area. But nothing worked because the sniper stayed silent for 20 minutes, then shot again the moment someone stood up. When they finally killed him late in the day, it was a lucky burst from a machine gun that cut through the place where he was sitting, high above everyone. They found he'd only fired 18 rounds, but had killed 4 Marines and wounded 6 more. And the psychological toll was worse than the body count, because Marines started developing what medics called sniper neurosis, a constant hunched posture and the inability to move naturally. Because every instinct screamed that standing upright meant death, and platoon leaders couldn't conduct normal tactical movements. You couldn't send runners between positions. You couldn't establish proper defensive perimeters, and everything slowed to a crawl, because one invisible man with a rifle had reduced your combat effectiveness to almost nothing. And the worst part, the Japanese knew it. Their field manuals explicitly emphasized sniper operations as a force multiplier, calculating that one skilled marksman was worth 10 regular infantrymen in jungle terrain. By mid-1943, Marine Corps intelligence had a file 3 in thick, documenting Japanese sniper tactics positions and effectiveness. What they didn't have was a solution, because standard counter-sniper doctrine wasn't working. The enemy had too much concealment, too much patience, and too much ammunition to waste on suppressive fire. Something had to change, and it would. Thanks to a Nebraska carnival worker who'd spent his entire life understanding one simple truth: people can't help shooting at things that look like targets. Sergeant William Eldridge wasn't supposed to be the guy who changed Marine Corps tactics. He was supposed to be running the shooting gallery at the Nebraska State Fair, just like his father and grandfather before him. But Pearl Harbor had other plans. And in March 1942, Eldridge walked into a recruiting office in Lincoln with skills that seemed utterly worthless for modern warfare. 20 years of experience watching people shoot at moving ducks, knowing exactly when they'd pull the trigger, and understanding that shooters always took the bait. His platoon mates thought he was crazy. Not dangerous crazy, carnival crazy. The guy who'd seen too many coin tosses and ring throws and couldn't stop analyzing human behavior like it was all one big midway game. At Camp Pendleton, while everyone else obsessed over fieldcraft and fire discipline, Eldridge kept muttering about trigger timing and visual commitment. His squad leader finally told him to shut up about the carnival unless he wanted to peel potatoes until the war ended. So Eldridge shut up until Bougainville. November 1943. Third day of the campaign, Eldridge's company was trying to advance down a trail that a Japanese sniper had turned into a personal hunting preserve. 6 Marines down in 90 minutes. Nobody could spot the shooter. Standard procedure said, call for artillery, suppress the area, wait him out. But Eldridge was watching the bullet impacts, tracking the angles, and suddenly he wasn't seeing a sniper anymore. He was seeing that kid from Omaha who used to come to the fair every year. The one who'd empty his pockets, trying to knock down metal rabbits. Same behavior, same psychology, same exploitable pattern. And he told his lieutenant he had an idea. The lieutenant told him to get back in line, but Eldridge persisted and said he needed a helmet, a stick, and 2 minutes. The lieutenant, exhausted and desperate, gave him 30 seconds to explain before threatening him with insubordination charges. And what Eldridge said next sounded so ridiculous that 2 nearby riflemen started laughing. Sir, we make him waste his bullets shooting at nothing. Just like the shooting gallery. Wave a helmet, he shoots. We see where he shoots from. We kill him simple. The lieutenant's response was immediate and profane. You don't trick snipers, you suppress them with firepower or outflank them with maneuver. This wasn't a carnival game. This was combat. And combat had rules, doctrine, procedures written by people who actually understood warfare. Eldridge, to his credit, didn't back down. He pointed out that they'd already fired 3,000 rounds at that sniper without effect, called in 2 mortar strikes that hit nothing but trees, and lost 6 men doing things by the book. His way would cost 1 helmet and maybe some ammunition. The book's way was costing lives. What changed the lieutenant's mind wasn't Eldridge's logic. It was the wounded radio man they were carrying past on a stretcher, 17 years old. Shot through the jaw because he'd stood up for 2 seconds to adjust his antenna. The lieutenant looked at that kid, looked at Eldridge, and said 5 words that would echo through the rest of the Pacific War. Fine. Don't get yourself killed. Eldridge grabbed his helmet, found a sturdy branch about 5 feet long, and jammed the helmet onto one end. His squad thought they were watching a man commit elaborate suicide. The other platoon thought it was some kind of psychological breakdown. The company commander, watching from 50 yards back, reached for his binoculars with the weary certainty that he was about to witness the stupidest death of the campaign. Nobody, not one single Marine on that trail, thought Eldridge's carnival trick would actually work. Eldridge knelt behind a fallen log, extended the helmet topstick about 3 feet above the cover, and waved it slowly like a man moving through underbrush. The crack of the sniper's rifle came within 2 seconds. The helmet jerked as a round punched clean through the steel, and Marines who'd been preparing to write off Eldridge's stunt suddenly started paying very close attention. The sniper had taken the bait. The question was why, and whether he'd do it again. Japanese sniper training at the Nano School emphasized immediate target engagement based on a principle their instructors called Ichi Ichihatsu. 1 target. 1 shot. The doctrine wasn't about conserving ammunition. It was about maintaining psychological dominance. A sniper who saw an enemy helmet moving through vegetation and didn't fire was allowing that enemy to advance to establish position, potentially to spot the sniper's location, and the manual captured later at Saipan was explicit. Delay equals detection equals death. When you see the target, you shoot. Hesitation wasn't tactical patience, it was failure. That doctrinal reflex combined with something nobody at Nano School had accounted for: the human visual system's inability to distinguish real from fake targets at combat distances. When a helmet appears above cover, moving at roughly 2 miles per hour, the speed of a careful combat advance, the brain processes it as threat helmet. Shoot in a cascade that takes approximately 6 seconds. That's how long it takes for visual information to travel from the eye through the occipital lobe to the motor cortex and down to the trigger finger. 6 seconds where the conscious mind isn't really involved at all. It's pure trained reflex. But here's where Eldridge's carnival experience gave him an edge that Marine Corps doctrine hadn't considered. At the shooting gallery, he'd watched thousands of people shoot at mechanical ducks moving on tracks. The good shooters hit maybe 70%. The bad ones hit 30%. But everyone, and he meant everyone, took multiple shots, even when they knew the ducks were fake. It wasn't about being fooled. It was about the neurological commitment. Once your brain said target and your finger started pulling. The trigger stopping that sequence required conscious override, and conscious thought was always slower than reflex. Eldridge waved the helmet again. Different angle, different height, another crack, another hole. The sniper was committed now, locked into a behavioral loop that his training had hardwired into his nervous system. Target visible equals fire weapon. Each shot took roughly 4 seconds to cycle. Work the bolt. Acquire sight picture control. Breathing. Squeeze trigger. 4 seconds where the sniper's conscious mind could theoretically intervene and say, wait, this might be a decoy, but 4 seconds wasn't enough time. The motion looked right. The silhouette looked right. And that doctrinal imperative shoot or allow enemy advance overrode skepticism every single time. A Marine marksman named Corporal James Henshaw was counting the shots and tracking the muzzle flashes. By the third shot, he had the sniper triangulated 40 feet up in a coconut palm about 80 yards northeast, hidden in a cluster of fronds. The fourth shot confirmed it. A tiny flash, barely visible but there. Henshaw settled his Springfield .03 rifle, controlled his breathing exactly the way he'd been trained at Quantico, and sent 170 grains of copper-jacketed lead through the space where that flash had originated. The subsequent silence lasted about 10 seconds before someone started laughing. Then everyone was laughing, that slightly hysterical combat laughter that comes when you realize something impossibly stupid just worked. And Eldridge lowered his stick, examined the helmet with its 2 neat holes, and said the most Eldridge thing possible. Told you, just like the ducks. Word travels fast in a combat zone, especially when that word involves not dying. Within 48 hours, every rifle company in the division had heard about the Nebraska Carnival sergeant, who'd turned sniper hunting into a puppet show. Some officers dismissed it as lucky fluke. Others wanted to see it themselves. The company commander, a captain from Virginia who'd lost 11 men to snipers in 2 weeks, decided Eldridge was going to give a demonstration whether he wanted to or not. The opportunity came at Tarawa in November 1943 during what would become the bloodiest 76 hours of the Pacific War. To that point, the Marines hit the beaches on November 20th, expecting heavy resistance at the W's edge. What they got was that plus something worse. Japanese snipers who'd survived the naval bombardment and were methodically picking off anyone who thought they'd secured an area. The 2nd Marine Division's casualty reports from day one showed 38 confirmed sniper kills, a number that made conventional counter-sniper operations look completely inadequate. Eldridge's squad got tasked with clearing a Japanese strongpoint on day 1 too, a cluster of damaged bunkers where at least 3 snipers had established interlocking fields of fire. Standard assault doctrine would have meant calling in air support, probably losing a dozen Marines in the approach and hoping you caught the snipers in the blast radius. Instead, their platoon leader, now a believer. After Bougainville gave Eldridge the green light to try his carnival routine with proper support. They set up 4 helmet stations at different points around the strong point, each one manned by a Marine with a stick, and absolute faith that he was about to become a bullet magnet. The plan was coordinated, Wave. The helmets in sequence create multiple targets, forced the snipers to reveal themselves through muzzle flash and impact patterns. Behind each helmet operator, a Marine sniper with an .03 Springfield and a scope waited for something to shoot at that wasn't a decoy. The operation started at 0830 hours and turned into a masterclass in behavioral exploitation. First helmet goes up, crack, bullet flash spotted. Second helmet, crack. Different angle, second sniper identified. Third helmet, crack, third sniper confirmed. The Japanese marksmen couldn't help themselves, and it was really clear what they were doing. Their training, their doctrine, their entire tactical framework demanded they engage visible targets immediately. 4 Marines waving helmets on sticks had just turned 3 lethal snipers into predictable stimulus response machines that acted the same every time. Over the next 2 hours, those 4 helmets drew 47 separate shots from the Japanese positions, which was honestly unbelievable. 47 times a sniper saw what looked like a Marine head, pulled his trigger, and accomplished nothing except revealing his location. The Marine counter-snipers kept careful count. First sniper eliminated at 0845, second at 0920, third at 0953. Then things got interesting. Because the helmet trick had attracted snipers from adjacent positions who heard the firing and wanted to participate in what they thought was a target-rich environment. By 10:30 hours, Marine marksmen had confirmed 11 Japanese snipers killed, all drawn in by the decoys, all eliminated by shooters who'd never have spotted them without the helmet trick, forcing them to give away their positions. The cost to the Marines: 4 helmets with multiple holes, some sore arms from holding sticks for 2 hours, and 0 casualties. 0. In an operation that conventional doctrine suggested would cost at least 8 to 10 killed. And twice that wounded, Eldridge's carnival game had achieved complete tactical success without losing a single Marine, and this amazed everyone watching. The battalion commander showed up personally to watch the last hour. He didn't say much, just stood there with his arms crossed, watching helmets bob on sticks while his snipers dropped Japanese marksmen one by one. When it was over, he looked at Eldridge and asked one question. "Can you teach this?" Eldridge could teach it. But what he really taught the Marine Corps was something the Japanese logistics officers had been quietly worrying about since Guadalcanal ammunition arithmetic. Every Japanese sniper deployed to the Pacific carried 120 rounds in 6 stripper clips of 20 rounds each. That sounds like plenty until you realize it had to last for the entire duration of their deployment, which on fortified islands meant weeks or even months. Their supply doctrine assumed 15 rounds expended per day maximum, which meant an 8-day supply if they were disciplined. The helmet trick could burn through 50 rounds in an afternoon, which shocked many Marines. Marine intelligence first documented the ammunition constraint in January 1944 when they overran a sniper position on New Britain and found a dead Japanese marksman with only 7 rounds remaining and a handwritten note tucked in his ammunition pouch. A captured Korean labourer translated it. 17 days. No resupply. Conserve ammunition or die useless. That note made its way up to division intelligence, and suddenly people started doing math that should have been obvious from the beginning. Because Japanese logistics in the Pacific were terrible. Their supply lines were getting shredded by submarines. Island garrisons were isolated, surrounded, cut off. A sniper who wasted 47 rounds shooting at decoys wasn't just ineffective. He was operationally finished. The numbers told a brutal story. If a Japanese sniper started his deployment with 120 rounds and the Marines ran 4 helmet decoys for 2 hours, conservatively drawing 12 shots per decoy, that's 48 rounds. Expended 40% of his total ammunition gone in one morning shooting at helmets mounted on sticks. Now he's got 72 rounds left, but he's already behind the resupply curve because his commanders assumed he'd only use 30 rounds in 2 days, not lose 48 in 2 hours. And there's no resupply coming. The submarines have seen to that. What happened next was a psychological transformation that Marine forward observers started noticing. By February 1944, Japanese snipers were becoming hesitant. Not smart hesitant where they waited for better shots, panicked hesitant where they couldn't pull the trigger, even on real targets because they were terrified of running out of ammunition. Marines advancing through areas that should have been sniper country, reported enemy marksmen letting obvious targets pass. One patrol on Nwito reported a Japanese sniper who'd let 7 Marines walk past his position before finally shooting the 8th missing and immediately displacing, a violation of every principle in his training manual. Captured Japanese after-action reports, the few that existed from units not completely annihilated, confirmed what the Marines were seeing. One document from Quadrilin described sniper squads rendered combat ineffective by enemy deception tactics requiring excessive ammunition expenditure. Another from Saipan reported snipers abandoning positions after expending 70 rounds with negligible enemy casualties achieved. These weren't combat losses. These were snipers still alive, but functionally useless because they'd been tricked into emptying their pouches, shooting at nothing. The helmet trick had weaponized scarcity. Japanese doctrine assumed their snipers were shooting at real targets, achieving real kills, justifying every round expended. But when 40% of those rounds punched through empty helmets, the entire tactical framework collapsed. A sniper with 20 rounds left wasn't a threat, multiplier anymore. He was a regular rifleman who happened to be stuck in a tree with no way to meaningfully affect the battle. He'd gone from hunter to witness, watching Marines advance while he conserved his last magazine for some desperate final stand that probably would not matter anyway. Marine casualty reports started reflecting the shift. Confirmed sniper kills per battalion dropped from averages of 12 per day in late 1943 to 7 per day. By April 1944, incomparable island assaults. The Japanese snipers had not gotten worse at shooting. They had just been systematically starved of ammunition through a carnival trick that cost the Marines nothing but helmets. The Marine Corps does not usually adopt tactics invented by carnival workers, especially when those tactics sound like something a desperate platoon made up 5 minutes before getting overrun. Military institutions run on doctrine field manuals and training procedures developed by people with academy credentials and staff college diplomas. But by January 1944, the casualty numbers from the Pacific were forcing some uncomfortable admissions at headquarters. Traditional counter-sniper operations were not working. Eldridge's helmet trick was, sometimes the numbers do not care about your credentials. The formal standardization process started in February 1944 at Camp Pendleton, where Marine Corps schools convened a working group on counter-sniper tactics. They brought in Eldridge, now sporting a Bronze Star he thought was ridiculous, and asked him to demonstrate his technique to a room full of skeptical officers who had spent their entire careers studying warfare through the lens of established military theory. What they saw was a Nebraska sergeant waving a helmet on a stick while explaining sight picture acquisition and trigger psychology, using carnival terminology that was not in any field manual. Half the room thought it was embarrassing. The other half thought it might save lives. The compromise was typical military bureaucracy. They would adopt the tactic but dress it up in proper doctrinal language. The official training manual released in March 1944 called it Decoy-Initiated Counter-Sniper Protocol instead of Eldridge's helmet trick. The equipment list specified expendable helmet mounted on portable extension device instead of helmet on a stick. But the actual content was pure carnival logic. Translated into military speak, present realistic target silhouette employ, irregular movement patterns maintain operator concealment. All of which meant, wave the helmet, do not stand where the helmet is, and try not to look stupid. While doing it, what made the doctrine actually effective was not the manual, it was the refinements that came from Marines who took Eldridge's basic concept and started experimenting. A corporal from Iowa added weight to the helmet interior so it bobbed more naturally when moved. A private from Texas discovered that dragging the helmet slowly across an opening drew more shots than waving it. A sergeant from Louisiana figured out that if you paused the helmet for 3 seconds, then moved it, suddenly snipers would fire reflexively at the motion. Within 2 months, rifle companies were developing their own variations, each one exploiting some aspect of human visual response and trigger psychology. The training program became surprisingly sophisticated. By April 1944, every Marine rifle company in the Pacific Theater received a 2-hour block of instruction on helmet decoy operations. They practiced on bamboo poles cut to precise 5-foot lengths, short enough to control long enough to keep your head away from the helmet. They learned choreographed movement patterns, slow wave pause, quick bob, diagonal sweep. The instructors, many of them combat veterans who'd seen the technique work, taught timing and rhythm, like they were teaching dance steps. Move too predictably, and smart snipers might catch on. Move too erratically, and you don't trigger their engagement reflex. The sweet spot was human natural, the irregular rhythm of a real Marine moving carefully through hostile terrain. Some units added theatrical elements that would have made Eldridge proud. They put lieutenant bars on some helmets to make them priority targets. They attached fabric strips to simulate camouflage covers fluttering in wind. One creative company on Plu started adding fake radio antennas made from bent wire banking on Japanese doctrine that prioritized killing communications personnel. The Japanese kept shooting, the Marines kept counting, and the body count kept shifting in the right direction. By June 1944, what had started as one sergeant's ridiculous idea had become standard operating procedure across the entire Marine Corps Pacific Command. The official after-action reviews were careful to credit systematic doctrinal development rather than a carnival worker from Nebraska. But every Marine who'd actually done it knew the truth. The real test of any tactic isn't whether it works once under ideal conditions. It's whether it scales across different terrain, different enemy units, and different tactical situations. The helmet trick got that test across every major island campaign from early 1944 through the end of the war. And the data that emerged told a story that even the skeptics at headquarters couldn't dismiss. Between Tarawa in November 1943 and Iwima in February 1945, Marine casualties attributed to sniper fire dropped by 38%, despite fighting in terrain that should have made sniping more effective, not less. The statistics were stark. At Tarawa, the 2nd Marine Division recorded 114 confirmed sniper casualties over 76 hours roughly. 1.5 Marines killed or wounded per hour of combat operations at Saipan. In June 1944, 7 months after helmet decoy doctrine became standard, the same division in comparable jungle terrain recorded 68 sniper casualties over 3 weeks. The raw numbers looked similar until you factored in operational tempo. Saipan involved 15 times more combat hours, meaning the per-hour sniper. Casualty rate had dropped to 0.04. Same division, same enemy, completely different outcome. Pleo in September 1944 provided even more compelling evidence because the terrain was sniper paradise. Coral ridges with countless caves, elevation advantages and firing positions that could cover multiple approaches. Japanese commanders had specifically selected sniper positions during their months of defensive preparation, creating interlocking fields of fire that should have made Marine advances catastrophically expensive. Instead, 1st Marine Division after-action reports documented a pattern that kept repeating helmet decoys deployed, Japanese snipers engaged, counter-snipers eliminated threats. Advances continued with minimal casualties. One rifle company logged 43 separate helmet decoy operations over 8 days, drew an estimated 300 Japanese shots, and suffered only 2 sniper casualties during that period. The Japanese knew what was happening to them. Captured documents from Saipan included a tactical memorandum dated July 2nd, 1944 from a Japanese infantry colonel to his remaining sniper teams. A Marine translator working for Division Intelligence flagged it as significant enemy employs false targets to waste ammunition and reveal positions. Sniper teams must exercise fire discipline and verify targets before engagement. The memo then listed specific recognition factors: check for neck shadow, verify arm movement, confirm natural gait patterns. It was a desperate attempt to counter-program the reflexive target engagement that Japanese doctrine had spent years drilling into their snipers. The problem was that conscious verification takes time, and time in combat gets you killed. A sniper who paused 3 seconds to verify whether that helmet was real or fake was a sniper who let actual Marines advance 3 seconds closer to his position. Japanese field commanders were trapped between 2 bad options: shoot reflexively and waste ammunition on decoys, or hesitate and allow enemy advances. The Marines had weaponized that dilemma, and there wasn't a good doctrinal answer. By Iwima, in February 1945, captured Japanese position maps told the final story. Marine intelligence recovered planning documents from a destroyed command bunker that showed sniper positions color-coded by ammunition status. Red positions indicated critical ammunition shortage. The map had 43 sniper positions. Marked 37 were red. The annotations translated by bilingual Nissi Marines repeatedly referenced enemy deception, consuming excessive ammunition and resupply. Impossible. Position effectiveness degraded. These weren't positions that had been overrun or destroyed. These were positions still occupied by living Japanese snipers who'd been reduced to tactical irrelevance because they'd shot at too many helmets. The cumulative strategic impact was impossible to quantify precisely, but division medical officers made educated estimates. If sniper casualty rates had remained at Tarawa levels through Iwo, the Marine Corps would have suffered an additional 4,000 sniper-related casualties across the island campaigns. 4,000 Marines who came home instead of dying to an invisible enemy. All because one carnival worker understood that shooters always take the bait. Eldridge made it through Okinawa in spring 1945, which statistically shouldn't have happened. The 10th Army suffered over 65,000 casualties during 82 days of fighting, making it the bloodiest campaign of the Pacific War. Eldridge's company took 68% casualties, which meant he watched most of the men he'd trained and fought alongside get killed or evacuated. He spent those final months of combat doing the same thing he'd been doing since Bougainville, waving helmets on sticks, teaching new replacements the carnival tricks, and trying not to think about how something that seemed so obvious to him had somehow become revolutionary. Military doctrine. When the war ended in August 1945, Eldridge was a staff sergeant with a Bronze Star, 2 Purple Hearts from wounds he barely remembered getting, and a service record that mentioned his innovative tactical contributions to counter-sniper operations. He got processed out at Camp Pendleton in October, received his discharge papers, and took a bus back to Lincoln, Nebraska. His father picked him up at the station, asked how the war was, and Eldridge said what almost every combat veteran says: "Fine, it was fine." Let's talk about something else. The shooting gallery was still there on the fairgrounds, same mechanical ducks running on the same tracks, same bell that rang when you hit the target. Eldridge stepped back into running it like he'd never left. Except now he had this weird habit of watching people's trigger discipline and muttering about sight picture acquisition. Customers thought he'd gotten particular about his carnival game. He'd actually spent 3 years watching the same behavioral patterns get men killed or keep them alive, depending on which side understood them better. The Bronze Star citation arrived by mail in November 1945, forwarded from Marine Corps headquarters. It credited him with exceptional ingenuity in developing counter-sniper techniques that significantly reduced casualties across multiple campaigns. Eldridge read it once, put it in a drawer, and never brought it up, unless someone directly asked when they did ask. Usually other veterans who recognized the ribbon when he wore it to VFW meetings. His explanation was always the same. Just seemed like common sense. Shooters shoot at targets. We gave them fake targets. Not exactly rocket science, but it was rocket science, or at least behavioral science. Neurology and tactical psychology, wrapped up in carnival intuition. Eldridge never framed it that way because he'd learned everything by watching thousands of people try to win stuffed animals. He didn't know the academic terms for visual stimulus response or doctrinal behavioral conditioning. He just knew that people, Japanese snipers included, couldn't help shooting at things that looked like things they were supposed to shoot at. And once you understood that the rest was just execution, the Marine Corps kept using helmet decoy tactics through Korea and into Vietnam with modifications for different terrain and enemy doctrine. The basic principles stayed the same. Exploit the opponent's training and reflexes against them using cheap decoys that cost nothing and saved lives. Various field manuals over the decades credited the technique to systematic doctrinal development in the Pacific Theatre, without mentioning that it came from a carnival worker who thought the whole thing was obvious. Eldridge ran the shooting gallery until he died in 1987 at age 71. His obituary in the Lincoln Journal-Star mentioned his Marine Corps service in one sentence and spent 3 paragraphs talking about how he'd been a fixture at the State Fair for 50 years. Nobody mentioned that his carnival trick had saved thousands of lives. Nobody mentioned that he'd turned Japanese sniper doctrine inside out, using principles he'd learned, watching people shoot at mechanical ducks. He probably would have preferred it that way. Common sense doesn't need monuments, it just needs to work.